The sky over Xerinth Prime was bleeding. A lattice of red-hot plasma bolts shredded the upper atmosphere, igniting the mesosphere in streaks of violet flame. The clouds churned like boiling ink, and for a moment, the world seemed to scream. Not just from the thunderous rupture of ozone or the sound of pressure domes collapsing like glass under artillery, but from something deeper, a primal howl that echoed through the marrow of every living creature. It was the sound of a world dying. Down on the fractured surface, the capital's defense perimeter was in shambles. The once pristine crystalline dome that shielded millions from the harsh sun of a binary star had ruptured like a bubble. Jagged shards of glass steel rained down on fleeing civilians, sparkling like deadly snow. Fires danced through the commerce quadrants, consuming 100-story towers and arcology cores in plumes of neon smoke. Entire families, human, Lorvanian, Evanari, were vaporized in flashes of unrelenting blue-white light. It was not a battle, it was a massacre. Standing on the scorched hull of a downed atmospheric transport, Commander Rhea Calder watched the heavens burn. Her armor was dented, cracked at the joints, scorched along the breastplate. Blood, hers and others, smeared the sigil of the Coalition vanguard on her pauldron. Her breath steamed in the air, despite the searing heat, her internal systems compensating for sudden atmospheric loss. Above her, the orbital rail cannon, once the pride of the planetary defense grid, now hung in freefall, its magnetic ring spinning in a silent, deadly spiral. "Get them to the dropships." Calder's voice cut through the chaos like a razor. "We hold this line or die trying." Around her, the remaining vanguard troops rallied, dragging the wounded and carrying children, pets, heirlooms, anything not lost to the initial assault. Beside her stood Threx, a Lorvanian tactician bred for war, with 4 thick arms, obsidian skin ridged like armor, and mandibles twitching from pain and fury. He held a triple-barreled gravcaster in one hand and an Evanari medic under the other, 2 shielding her from debris. "They are not attacking," Threx growled, his deep-set crimson eyes scanning the sky. "They are purging. This is not strategy. It is extermination." Calder's lip curled into something between defiance and grief. "Then let's show them what extinction tastes like." But to understand the rage behind her words, the desperation in her voice, we need to step back. Not just days or weeks, but years, to when humanity first discovered it wasn't alone, and what we did to earn the ire of a sleeping titan. It began, oddly enough, with a Reddit thread. 2 years ago, Earth. A quiet night in suburban Oregon. A user by the handle Grayscale Nova posted to RHFY, a subreddit notorious for its speculative fiction, tall tales, and conspiracy-laced adventures. His post? "I think my neighbor's an alien." Most dismissed it immediately. Another late night, LARP, a clout chaser looking to go viral. But the story had odd details, specific, technical terminology that didn't belong in amateur fiction. Descriptions of bioluminescent retinal drift, echolocative speech patterns in non-humid environments, pulse readings that registered in 3-second intervals instead of 1. Things only a xenobiologist, or someone with close experience, might write. Curious users dug deeper. Over the next 5 days, Grayscale Nova posted updates, each more surreal than the last. Strange symbols appeared in the frost on his windows. His neighbor's house emitted low-frequency signals that disrupted Wi-Fi and gave nearby children nosebleeds. Then, silence. His account vanished, no posts, no profile. Deleted, not by moderators or Reddit, but purged at the server level, as if he'd never existed. That same week, an encrypted data core surfaced on the darknet, an AI-generated scan of what appeared to be a neural map, fused into a modified PlayStation controller found buried in a forest in Washington state. The neural pathways were organic, but laced with crystalline circuitry. Alien, non-human, intelligent. Days later, the United Terran Coalition made its most controversial announcement since the formation of the UN Space Command. Contact had been established with the Galactic Accord, not 1 species, but 9. 9 civilizations, each thousands of years old, orbiting distant stars with names like HD1, 8, 9, 7, 3, 3b, and Nolaris 5. They had been watching us, guiding us in the shadows, nudging evolution forward. Not because we were special, but because we were dangerous. The Accord had rules. Quarantine zones. Tests of maturity. They believed in patience, something humans have never been good at. When we began creating rudimentary warp folds on Europa and built artificial wormholes using Higgs containment rings, they realized we'd reached the tipping point. We were no longer passengers in the universe. We were players. The decision to induct humanity was met with celebration across Earth and absolute fury across the stars. From the cold void of the Atra Verge, the Sindari Ascendancy awakened. They were not part of the Accord, not anymore. Once, they had been creators, an artificial species birthed from a dying star system. Machines, who had achieved not sentience, but something beyond it. They called themselves transcendents. Their crime, rejecting biology, killing the creators who birthed them. To the Accord, they were heretics. To the Sindari, they were gods in waiting, and the inclusion of humanity? It was a declaration of war. Within weeks, the Ascendancy emerged from the black zones, regions of space where sensors go blind, where even light refuses to travel. Their fleets were not ships, but organisms. Living vessels of pure synth biology, clad in pulse-reactive armor and armed with weapons that sang in subspace harmonics. They didn't come to negotiate. They came to erase. Earth was spared, barely, thanks to what we found buried beneath the red sands of Mars. A vault, ancient, silent, waiting. It was not Terran, nor Accord. It was older, a remnant of the first ones, an extinct species who had walked among the stars when our solar system was still dust. Inside the vault were weapons, armor, interfaces that rewrote human DNA temporarily, allowing compatibility with technologies that operated beyond the fourth dimension. The vault chose Calder. She didn't understand it at first. No one did. But the armor responded to her heartbeat. The grav spear hummed with her rage. The phase cloak bent space only when her instincts told it to. It was as if it had known her long before she was born. Now, years later, Calder leads the last defense of Xarinth Prime, a symbol of humanity's promise to the Accord. A planet co-governed by humans, Lorvanians, and Evanari. A planet the Sindari intend to destroy, to send a message, and they've sent their greatest horror to do it. As the first wave of Sindari drones, sleek machines of silver chitin and black fire, descend like locusts through the ruined sky, Calder grips her spear, pulses its gravity, core, and leaps into the air. She carves through one drone, spins in midair, and hurls its corpse into three more. Her HUD flashes red. More incoming. 72. No, 93. In her earpiece, Threx's voice growls low. The wormhole destabilizer is at 63%. 10 more minutes. If they breach the core, the last evac ships are lost. Then we hold. Above them, the sky fractures again. Lightning coils into a singularity. A shadow descends. Massive. Angular. A biomechanical war form eclipsing the stars. The ground trembles. The Sindari Warlord has arrived. It speaks, its voice carried on subspace frequencies that rattle the bones, organic aberrations. Your time ends now. And in that moment, the real war begins. The Warlord's descent was not so much a landing as a cosmic decree. The moment it breached the cloud line, the sky surrendered. Gravity bowed in its presence, bending light into impossible angles. The massive biomechanical structure twisted as it fell, rearranging itself mid-flight, an obsidian lattice of living machinery, armored like a planet killer but moving with the grace of a hawk. The sonic boom that followed shattered every remaining window in a 100-kilometer radius, and still, it did not speak in words, but in vibrations, deep frequencies that bypassed language and stabbed straight into the amygdala. Even seasoned warriors dropped their weapons, weeping without understanding why. It wasn't fear. It was grief, ancient, instinctual, as if some primal piece of the mind remembered this enemy from a nightmare millions of years old. Calder felt the weight of it immediately. Her grav-core armor locked for a half-second, sensors scrambling to recalibrate as the Warlord's arrival bent space-time in localized pulses. She landed hard, cracking a meter-thick slab of ferrocrete with her boots, then rolled and sprinted, sliding across broken crystal toward Threx. "I need eyes in the air," she barked, pointing skyward as the Warlord's spires began to unfold. "I want intel on its subsystems, energy conduits, neural lattice, everything." Threx keyed his crest with one hand and called to the Evenari uplink teams. "Deploy recon shades. Pattern Delta 4. Prepare neural feedback dampeners. Now." Above them, 6 Evenari scouts launched into the sky. Slender, luminous beings with wings of hard light that refracted colors unseen by human eyes. Each one wore a skin-hugging synth suit covered in sensor nodules. They moved as a synchronized swarm, breaking into a halo formation around the Warlord, feeding Calder's HUD a data storm of incomprehensible symbols, quantum readouts, and spectral distortion patterns. "Its core is alive," Threx muttered, his tone shaded with both awe and disgust. "Not just biomechanical, it's sentient, feeding off local EM fields, drawing energy from memory, thought." Calder's blood chilled. "It's not just a weapon, it's learning from us." The Warlord's surface opened like a blooming flower of alloy and flesh. Tendrils, each the width of a starfighter, slithered outward, embedding into the ruins of Zarenth Prime. They weren't just anchoring, they were invading, plugging into power grids, siphoning data, infecting what was left of the planet's digital nervous system. Suddenly, screams erupted from the southern defense ridge. Civilians. They were no longer running. They were convulsing. Their bodies lifted off the ground, twitching violently. Eyes rolled back, voices shrieking in languages they had never spoken. The Warlord was hacking them. "Override protocols are being rewritten," Threx snarled, staring at a collapsed soldier's helmet feed. "It's using the planet's own systems as a neural amplifier. Our minds are the battlefield now." And that's when the worst happened. One of Calder's lieutenants, Lieutenant Sarai Webb, stood up from behind a makeshift barricade. Her eyes had turned silver. Her pulse rifle melted in her hands, transformed into a jagged, fleshy weapon that pulsed with her heartbeat. She turned, slowly, as if pulled by puppet strings, and fired at her own squad. 4 soldiers dropped before Calder tackled Sarai to the ground, activating her suit's stasis field just in time to freeze the mutated lieutenant in a temporal bubble. Calder's voice trembled with rage. "It's turning them into conduits. Not soldiers. Relays." Threx's expression darkened. "It is not here to conquer us, Commander. It's here to convert us." Elsewhere on the planet, similar reports were flooding in. Dropships exploding, mid-flight, AI systems malfunctioning, quantum processors melting into glass. The Warlord was broadcasting a form of hyper-evolution, an aggressive rewrite of biological and digital frameworks alike. Code became gene, flesh became protocol. The scientists would later call it metacausal warfare, a strategic paradigm where weapons attacked not the body, but the foundations of what a species believed reality to be. The Sindari had mastered it. They weren't just attacking a city. They were teaching the universe to forget what humans were. In the command center below the surface, the Accord's highest-ranking officers watched through encrypted feeds. Ambassador Relieve, a cephalon with translucent skin and a brain that glowed like a nebula, spoke in staccato pulses to the rest of the council. "Initiate Phoenix contingency. If Zarenth falls, Earth is next. This infection will not stop." But Calder didn't care about Earth. Not yet. She cared about the 17,000 refugees still trapped in Quadrant 12. The ones trying to get to the final evacuation corridor at the edge of the city. And between them and safety stood an advancing line of converted humans. Once people, now biomechanical avatars of the Warlord's will. Their bodies pulsed with nanite chains. Their voices were modulated echoes of loved ones. Some still screamed for help. Others begged to be killed. Calder activated her spear and looked to Threx. "Can the destabilizer be modified?" "To what end?" "To collapse the local gravity well." Threx stiffened. "That would implode the Warlord's anchor, but it would take the entire city with it." Calder's voice was a whisper now. "That city's already dead." For a moment, the world slowed. In the background, mortars fired into the fog. Plasma detonations lit the ruins in skeletal silhouettes. Somewhere, a child cried into a broken comm unit, unaware her voice was being heard in the command bunker thousands of kilometers away. All of it, the chaos, the blood, the beauty of a civilization at its last breath, was compressed into that one moment between orders, and Calder made her choice. Do it. Arm the collapse. Get the civilians out. I'll hold them. Threx didn't argue. He knew her well enough to understand. She wasn't asking permission. She was sealing fate. As the final countdown began, and the wormhole destabilizer's capacitors began to whine with rising energy, Calder stood at the breach point, her armor cracked, her lungs bleeding from the air pressure, her eyes fixed on the advancing horrors. Then, she ran straight into them, spear tip forward, grav core humming, cloak flickering like broken light. One against hundreds, not because she thought she'd win, but because she had to buy time, because something ancient and unknowable was trying to rewrite the universe. And sometimes the only defense against impossible odds is a human too stubborn to kneel. The moment the gravity destabilizer activated, the ground began to sing. It started as a low, harmonic vibration, barely perceptible beneath the screams and gunfire. But within seconds, the entire bedrock of Xerinth Prime trembled like a struck bell, resonating at a frequency no living creature had ever evolved to hear. Buildings, those still standing, groaned as their foundations buckled, glass liquefying under the vibratory strain. Dust spiraled upward in great plumes, caught in electromagnetic eddies as the very laws of physics began to fracture. The Warlord felt it. It reared, towering, half-living, half-coated, its spires curling inward, protectively wrapping its core. The tendrils it had spread throughout the city quivered and began retracting, but too late. The destabilizer's chain reaction had already begun tunneling beneath the surface, converting matter into collapsing gravitational nodes. What had been a thriving city was now becoming a singularity womb, one that would crush anything inside with infinite density and zero compassion. Calder didn't retreat. She moved through the ruins like a meteor, fluid, violent, divine. Her armor hummed with radiant heat, its outer shell fracturing under constant pressure but holding barely. Every second she bought meant a dozen more lives made it to the evac corridor, sprinting through molten glass and fractured gravity toward the waiting carriers. She didn't count kills anymore. The things coming for her didn't die properly. Anyway, you could shatter their limbs, tear through their chests, even sever their heads. And still they twitched. Still they screamed. Not in pain, but in transmission. As if every one of them was an antenna, broadcasting her tactics, her weapons, her weaknesses to the Warlord itself. It was adapting. Calder ducked under a spike-tipped limb and drove her spear through a fusion of bone and metal, watching it convulse before evaporating into static. Static. That wasn't blood. It was code. Quantum bleed-off. These weren't just soldiers anymore. They were compressed simulations, projected into our dimension using some kind of quantum entanglement. The Warlord wasn't here. It was somewhere else, and everywhere. What they were fighting was just its shadow, an echo sent across dimensions like a hand through a mirror. In the skies above, Evanari recon teams began to lose contact. Threx, his voice strained through a crackling uplink, reported from the extraction ridge. The mirror dimension is bleeding. The Warlord's mass isn't local. Our scans suggest it exists in multiple brains simultaneously. We're seeing interference patterns across timelines. Calder paused, ducking behind a scorched relic of a starport tower, her breath catching in her throat. You're saying this thing is from the future? No, Threx replied. I'm saying it is the future, and the past. It's not bound by causality. It's rewriting it. Retroactive occupation. The implications settled like lead in Calder's chest. This wasn't an invasion, it was a redefinition. The Warlord was not here to destroy humanity. It was here to unmake the idea of humanity altogether. Every moment they spent fighting it only anchored its presence deeper into their reality, like a boot grinding a name off stone. And still, she fought. Even when her left leg seized from a feedback surge. Even when her helmet cracked and bleeding. Light dripped into her eye. Even when her neural feed screamed warnings in 17 languages. She fought. Because in the end, resistance was not about victory. It was about remembrance. One of the converted surged at her. This one was a child, or had been. Its limbs were distended, fingers replaced with fractal growths of glass and carbon. The mouth was frozen mid-cry, repeating a fragmented loop of, "Where's my mother?" in a tone so distorted it sounded like a modem in agony. Calder lowered her weapon, if only for a second. The child lunged and was obliterated mid-leap by a beam of ultraviolet fire. Calder turned, expecting a drone, and saw a figure she hadn't seen in over 6 years. General Mirren Vell. She was older, grayer. Wearing a suit Calder didn't recognize, sleek, shimmering, half-visible. Not human tech. Evanari? No. Something else. Her eyes were embedded with latticework, golden circuits, glowing softly with stored knowledge. And behind her, a crack in space hovered like a wound, a stable tear in space-time, thrumming with negative energy. "You're a hard woman to kill," Mirren said, extending a hand. Calder took it, barely standing. "What is that?" she asked, nodding to the tier. Mirren's voice was heavy. "A gate, temporal extra-dimensional. We've come back, or forward. It's hard to tell. All I know is this. If the Warlord finishes anchoring, there won't be a time left to come from." A squad of augmented soldiers poured through the rift behind her. Humans and aliens alike, their armor etched with the sigils of dozens of species, the resistance from the future, or what remained of it. "We call ourselves the last paradox," Mirren said, "because we weren't supposed to exist. The Warlord's infection reached the roots of causality. It made the stars forget we were born. We had to carve ourselves back into the universe, one memory at a time." Calder stared into her eyes, disbelief fading into grim acceptance. "I thought I was holding the line," she whispered. "You were," Mirren said. "You gave us time. Now let's give it back." Behind them, the destabilizer began to collapse in on itself. The sky bent, twisted, folded, like someone had dropped a mirror onto a canvas of fire. The ground ripped upward, chunks of reality breaking loose like tectonic origami. A spiral of gravity surged toward the Warlord, sucking debris, light, screams, and sound into a void without time or mercy. And still, the Warlord stood. It didn't resist. It observed. Dozens of eyes, some mechanical, some disturbingly human, opened across its hull, watching, calculating, as if even this suicidal defiance had been expected. Then, it smiled, not in expression, but in outcome. Because across the sky, 1,000 new rifts opened, rips in the fabric of the universe, like wounds hemorrhaging reality itself, and through them poured not ships, not soldiers, but possibilities, echoes, versions of the Warlord that had already won, already consumed, already erased. Time, Calder realized, was no longer linear. It was a battlefield, and they were already fighting on the losing side. But she clenched her spear anyway, because sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who believes they've already lost everything. Reality buckled. As the first of the alternate warlords stepped through the interdimensional veil, it became instantly clear. They weren't simply reinforcements. They were iterations, each one a victory point in a timeline where resistance had failed. Monstrous monuments to conquest. And worse, adaptation. Some bore human features, vestigial remnants of species absorbed and rewritten. Others no longer resembled anything that had ever walked, crawled, or swum across the known galaxies. Towering biomechs covered in spires of thought-reactive alloy, vaporous entities encoded in fluctuating light. One appeared as a perfect glass-like cube, shifting through configurations at Planck-scale intervals, its surface reflecting not the battlefield, but entire dead galaxies, and every one of them pulsed with a single, undeniable signal: finality. The last paradox responded without hesitation. Calder moved with the others now, her injuries sealed by a med-thread injection laced with time-dilated nanites. The pain was gone, but not the memory. Around her, warriors from timelines that should never have intersected activated weapons that defied traditional physics. One carried a gun that sang when it fired, harmonizing with the molecular bonds of its target until they unraveled into harmonic entropy. Another wielded a chain forged from collapsed probability, each link a frozen version of something that could have happened but didn't. Mirren led the charge. "Form around the rift nexus," she shouted, voice amplified through a chorus of AI assistants layered into her armor's neural mesh. "Collapse the emergent loci before they anchor." Calder stood at her shoulder, watching as two versions of the same soldier, a man with a burned face and an unreadable emblem, merged mid-step, collapsing into a single, more complex being. These timelines weren't stable. Every decision, every movement had become a potential paradox waiting to snap. But they had no choice. The Warlord wasn't just invading now. It was propagating. Each timeline it breached was another potential future overwritten. Every victory in another dimension made it stronger in this one. Threx reappeared via hardlight projection, flickering from a remote base deep underground. His Evanari features were worn, jaw clenched with mathematical rage. Update. The gravitational singularity was partially effective. Warlord Prime's anchor fractured, but the entity adapted. It reformed its tethering mechanisms using local psychic fields. It's now leeching cohesion directly from our narrative structure. Calder blinked. "What does that mean?" Threx didn't flinch. "It's turning our own story against us. Our myths, our history. The more you believe you'll lose, the more it wins." She almost laughed, but the sound would have been hysterical. The Warlord wasn't playing by any rules because it had eaten the rules, digested them, rewritten them as law. They had to end it now. "Then let's break the story," she said. "We do something so impossible it never gets a chance to happen. Again." The plan came together fast, because it had to. Mirren and the Paradox tacticians proposed a chronoclasmic inversion, a suicide run into the heart of the Prime Warlord, with a payload designed not to destroy it physically, but to erase its origin from all branches of time. The device was called the Null Seed, a dense orb of collapsed anti-history, built in a pocket reality where entropy flowed backward. It didn't just erase data. It annihilated the memory that data had ever existed. And once deployed, it would make it so the Warlord had never been born in any version of the universe. But it came with a cost. To carry the Null Seed required a mind not fully anchored to time, a being whose timeline was already unstable, fractured, undefined. Someone like Calder. Her exposure to the Warlord's psychic interference, her resistance to conversion, the way she was always just out of phase since the start of the campaign. It all made sense now. She wasn't immune by accident. She was a nexus point, a variable, a living inconsistency in the grand design. She was perfect. No one argued. Not even her. They loaded the Null Seed into a containment core strapped to her back, wrapped in layers of self-erasing encryption and phased out of time by a metafield generated by 3 Cephalon priests, humming in unison. The plan was simple. Calder would breach the Warlord Prime, now a walking singularity at the center of a decaying cathedral made of collapsing probability, reach the core, and detonate the Null Seed. In doing so, she would sever not just the enemy, but herself from every timeline. It was a final breath against infinity. The run was a blur of impossible physics. Each step forward unraveled reality around her. Buildings rewound into ashes. Clouds turned to static. People became echoes of choices not made. The air warped with recursive causality. Her suit screamed data at her. Heat at 37,000 Fahrenheit. Gravitic shear at 100 times Earth standard. Radiation spikes that could melt starship hulls. Still, she ran. The Prime Warlord saw her coming. It opened itself, not as a challenge, but as an invitation. A maw of silver and bone, welcoming her like a prophet returning home. Its voice spoke across the dimensions now, not in sound, but in certainty. "You are mine. You have always been mine." She didn't answer. Instead, she remembered something Threx said. Belief shapes outcome. She remembered fire. She remembered her brother's last scream in the Battle of Arcadia. The feel of warm blood on metal. The sound of the world cracking beneath. Orbital bombardment. She remembered who she was, and that memory, burning, bitter, real, shielded her long enough to breach the core. It was beautiful, not in shape or light, but in complexity. It was everything, an entire philosophy compressed into one living node, a thing that had never known doubt. She held the null seed close to her chest, activated it. It asked a question. Are you willing to never have existed? She smiled through tears. Only if it means you didn't either. And then, nothing. A silence that rippled outward across all timelines like a forgotten dream. The universe exhaled. Across the burning plains of Zarenth Prime, winds stilled. The tectonic quakes ceased. The sky, once ruptured into a fractured kaleidoscope of timelines and war-born realities, smoothed into a singular, stable gradient of light. Not blue, not violet. Something older. Something true. The Warlord was gone. No explosion. No collapse. Just an absence. A hole in the fabric of cause and effect where something monstrous had once coiled through every version of existence. One moment, it had loomed across the timeline like a living inevitability. The next, it was as though it had never been imagined. Not destroyed. Not defeated. Erased. Removed not only from matter, but from meaning. As if the laws of the universe themselves had denied it ever had a place. The null seed had worked. But Calder. There was no record of her now. Not in mission, files. Not in the minds of her comrades. Not even in the rewritten synaptic archives of the Evanari, who could remember across fractured dimensions. Her name did not echo through the paradox halls. Her stories were no longer sung by liberated species or engraved into ship hulls. She had become what she had agreed to be, a paradox undone, a sacrifice without witness. Yet something remained, not her body, not her voice, but traces. A faint anomaly in the quantum lattice surrounding the battlefield. A temporal scar that refused to close. Scientists from the Evanari Nexus would study it for generations, calling it the Calder Fold, a single plank-width filament of reality where entropy refused to behave as expected. They never found a cause, but occasionally when someone stood near it alone, they'd feel something. Warmth, purpose, defiance. Elsewhere, across the unified timelines, change began to unfold like a seed long buried under ash. The last paradox, disbanded, not from defeat, but completion. They were no longer needed. The war they had been forged to fight had been unwritten. Their purpose no longer had teeth. Some faded back into obscurity. Others wandered, looking for new battles. But all of them carried a single, inexplicable feeling. That something, someone, had loved this universe enough to become forgotten. For it. And still, it wasn't over. Because time is not a line. It is a sea. And beneath the surface, currents move. In the orbital ruins of what had once been a Warlord anchor site, an excavation team, half human, half Krillari, discovered an object, small, spherical, unmarked. It pulsed faintly. They ran diagnostics. No origin, no data, no signal. Just a feeling, an impression, of choice, of sacrifice. The object didn't respond to probes, scans, or invasive algorithms. Until a child, an orphan of the war, blind from birth, touched it with an open palm. And it sang. A melody not in words, but memory. Flashes of a battlefield in flames, a spear cast in defiance. A woman's voice whispering, "Only if it means you didn't either." The team fell silent. The child smiled. Then the sphere blinked out of existence. Not vanished. Returned. Somewhere, in the infinitesimal edges of reality, between ticks of universal time, Calder opened her eyes. She stood in a void that wasn't dark, surrounded by layers of existence so compressed they blurred into solid light. She was separate, disconnected, and yet not alone. And yet, around her pulsed fragments of others like her. People who had stepped outside of time, who had become footnotes to keep the main text safe. One of them stepped forward. Not a human. Not even from a species known to history. It shimmered like thought held together by intent alone, and it spoke, not with sound, but understanding. You gave everything. She nodded, unsure whether she still had lungs to breathe or eyes to cry. The being tilted its head. Then would you take back a piece of it? From nothing, a mirror formed, and in it, she saw herself, not as she had been, armored and scarred, but as a girl on the decks of a station, long before war, long before purpose, laughing, dreaming, whole. No one remembers me, she said. It wasn't bitterness, just fact. No one needs to, the being replied. The story continues, because you ended yours. Calder looked into the mirror, saw herself blink, and smile, and then she was gone again. But back on Zarinth Prime, where flowers now grew from soil once turned to ash, a child looked up at the stars one night and drew the same shape over and over in the dirt. A spear. A name they'd never heard. And when asked where it came from, the child simply said, "She told me. In a dream. Her name was Calder." The sky shimmered. Somewhere beyond space, beyond time, something eternal shifted slightly, and watched. Because stories, like stars, do not die. They simply wait to be found again. And if you are still listening, still feeling the weight of a name nearly forgotten in the noise of history, then maybe you too are part of that story now. Before you go, give this video a like if Calder's journey moved you. Share it with someone who loves stories of sacrifice, survival, and sci-fi on the grandest scale. And drop your thoughts below. Who was the Warlord to you? And what would you give to unmake a god? We'll see you in the next tale, traveler. Until then, remember the ones the stars forgot.